Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock and we are going to continue our 2025 budget study session, and I will turn it over to City Manager Mike Scragg.
Thank you, Mayor. You're correct. We're in the throes of budget. Debbie Pack's prepared to make the presentation today. We put quite a bit of work into kind of the background behind this. What I would tell you as it relates to outside agencies is we've had an initial conversation with you about the general fund and wage rates and cost estimating, as well as revenue estimating. We're prepared to bring you a balanced budget for the general fund, and we need your direction on the outside agency items, but I think we're prepared to incorporate whatever direction you give us into the general fund budget. I don't think we find ourselves in a situation where these items would throw us out of budget as much as we need direction from you of how you'd like to proceed, so we then can factor it into the budget, the general fund that we'll bring to you next week. With that, there is quite a bit of information here, which is why we asked to start at 2 today, and I'll turn it over to Debbie Pack.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Debbie Pack, Director of Finance. As Mike mentioned, we will talk about funding. We call them issues and options, decisions on outside agency funding that we have previously presented to you. We gave them all the opportunity to come to you and kind of lay out their plans for 2025 and their requests. So we'll go over those and ask you for direction on funding for those particular items. The other piece of information that we'll talk about today are the non-personnel budgeted funds. As you know, we've been talking a lot about personnel, and we've been segregating out any funds that have personnel related expenses in them. And as you'll see in today's study session, there's a lot that don't. So we'll talk about those today and kind of where our estimates are, and just get you an overall feeling of where we are in those funds and if there's any particular direction that you want to go in those particular funds. So that's kind of what we'll talk about today. As Mike mentioned, next week we hope to bring you, we talked about a special study session next week. We don't have a normal meeting. We'll talk about, we'll hopefully be able to bring you all of the finalized budgets based on these decisions, so all of the finalized budgets for all funds. The other thing that we'll talk about next week is water rates. We've tried to incorporate that into the budget process as opposed to coming back later with that. So that'll be kind of a new item. The only fund that's not in today's discussion is the health fund. We're still doing a little bit of work on investigation and what the rates are doing and things like that, and how that's going to affect both our operating funds and rates in general for the health fund. So that one we held out for discussion for next week as well. So you won't see this in case you are wondering where that one is. We're still doing a little bit of work on that, having discussions with our advisors and things like that on that particular fund. So we'll hopefully have that one in next week's information as well. So we'll dive right in. Issues and options. Like I said, this is an opportunity for us to come back to you to get some consensus on where you want us to be with these particular items. Typically, besides outside agencies, this discussion often includes our property tax rate, personnel rates, comp fees, and a few other items. But we feel like we've had those discussions already. There's no need to, and got your consensus on most of those items already. So we were pretty comfortable with just letting those items go through as you've directed us already and put those into the budgets of the funds that are affected by those. So today's issues and options really are truly outside agencies. And we'll just go through each one of those. I'm just going to summarize. Basically, I gave you a lot of history in here about where we funded them before, what the increases are, some fund balances in some of these funds, and basically giving you what they're requesting for 2025. And then I'll ask you for a consensus or decision on each one of these on how you want to fund them for 2025. So on slide 3, we'll start. The first one is the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce. This is an agreement between the City of Salina and the Chamber, as far as they collect part of the transient guest tax that the city has levied. That's transient guest tax today is 7.75%. Of that, 3.7% goes to the Chamber of Commerce for various reasons. One, to support the Visit Salina, or CVB, one to support cultural arts marketing, and one to support Kenwood and Oakdale Park marketing, or part of that promotes that. The collections in 2023 were about $2.4 million. Of that, the area Chamber of Commerce got about 47.7%. That's about their percentage allocation of the total collection of funds. As you may or may not heard, the Chamber has begun some discussions about a website marketing effort, different than what we've kind of done before. They're still finalizing that proposal. Once that's in final form, that will go through several steps of recommendation before it does come to you for approval. In the case that changes, the funding changes, that will create some amendments to that agreement. That does not affect today's discussion. We'll budget what we have in our current agreement, and if that agreement changes, we'll adjust that accordingly. Historically, on slide 4, you can see that the transient guest tax obviously dropped significantly, and it was on the rise pretty significantly until about 2019, dropped through COVID for 2020 and 2021, has really rebounded very well since then, so that we're seeing that revenue go up each year. Slide 5 is a history of everything all of the funding that we've given to the Chamber since 2013, as far as their total allocation, what was allocated to Visit Salina, cultural marketing, and the Kenwood Oakdale marketing. For 2024, that budget amount was about $1.4 million total. For 2025, we're estimating about a $3 million total transient guest tax, of which we're estimating $1.4 million to go to the Chamber. 1.16 of that would be for Visit Salina, about $193,000 for cultural marketing, and about $77,000 for Kenwood Oakdale marketing. I did want to provide you information as far as where the fund balances for each of those sources is. Per their information as of 12/23, which are non-audited dollars, they were showing a fund balance in the Visit Salina about $494,000, the Kenwood Oakdale about $172,000, and NCARM of about $157,000. I did make a note, there are some guidelines about the balance that should be in that CARM fund, and we'll be working through that with the Chamber. And some of those dollars may come back to the city in support of TPEC. When that calculation gets done, that check will be issued from them to us if it's in excess of that dollar amount. So for Chamber, the options we have is to budget as we have estimated, and basically this is a pass-through, so we try to typically budget high so that on the revenue side, so that we don't have to come back with a budget amendment at the end of the year. So we typically do it a little bit high just for that reason. So the options are to budget as estimated or to take other actions as you might feel necessary. So I'll take a minute if you have questions. I know I have people from all of the agencies, I believe, here, so if you do have specific questions from where we talked before, feel free to ask them or myself, and we'd be glad to answer those.
And if I could jump in with just a little bit of clarification, as Debbie said, this reflects just pass-through as the current agreement provides. The conversations about the marketing effort are ongoing, but it's a combination of redirection of these funds for that purpose as well as the possibility of funds from outside agencies. So the vision, or at least my vision, I can't speak for the Chamber, but the conversation that we've been having has been existing funding levels, just redirection of funds for that purpose. And so that's the conversation that we're having, not as if it'll come back as a request for additional funding mid-budget year somewhere out in the future.
What does CARM stand for?
Cultural Arts and Regional Marketing.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Any questions, comments?
No, I'm okay with budgeting this, for this year. I think we do have to maybe have a study session in this upcoming year to decide how we're gonna, because I think there's certain guidelines as to how we can spend those dollars on transient guest tax if they actually qualify to use it for the marketing position we're discussing. So I think we need to do that this next year. I do think at some point, depending on how our transient guest tax continues to increase, there may be a point where we need to put a cap on that too. I don't know how that works. We'll just have to review that and see what other uses we have for those funds, because I know we're replacing ball field turf, and we have other maintenance to use those dollars for too, so we'll just need to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I would like to see a little more effort go into the marketing of Salina as a whole. I continue to get compliments from people who didn't know Salina existed, and any other comments? I think I'm okay with the funding.
I would agree.
So we're budgeted as estimated for the chamber. The next agency that we have on the list is Salina Downtown, Inc. Historically, Salina Downtown, Inc. has received 2 supplements from the city. They have several pockets of revenue, but two of the supplements that they get for the city, one is for a supplement to their operating budget, and the other one is for facade improvements, which is the improvement of exteriors of existing buildings and encouragement of new buildings, just to make sure that the exterior portions are being kept up, to make sure that our downtown is the place we want it to be. That's through a grant program that is programmed through Salina Downtown, Inc. In 2024, SDI received $80,000 in general stipend for their operating budget and $60,000 for the facade grant program. That is the current request for 2025 also. This funding comes from the Sales Tax Economic Development Fund, which is supported by sales tax. In addition to that funding, SDI is in has a transfer agreement with the city for 40.6% of the downtown CID funds, and that's reserved for maintenance, security, and programming of the downtown district. That portion on slide 7, you can see that historical amount. It's running around $160,000 in 2023. It's on track to hit that number, if not exceed that number, in 2024. In addition to that funding, there is some additional funding under the CID, the downtown CID category for existing retail. We've had conversations about whether or not that can be used for facade grant funding. And there's been some discussion about how to make that process a little bit easier without transfer agreements and such. So that's part of the ongoing conversation that we have. The remainder of SDI's budget is from the lead district fees. Those are fees allocated to businesses within that district to provide for security and maintenance and things like that downtown. The board of advisors for that district recommend each year what those fees would be. And for 2025, they're recommending that they have a 0% increase in those fees, which result in, again, a high estimate of $130,000 in revenue for them. So as you can see on the slide and on page 8, the historical funding for SDI from the city of Salina was $140,000 in 2024, and that's their current request for 2025. I also provided you what the fee increase history was, because there were several years where there was no increase, but in 2024 that board did agree to increase those fees 30% to kind of catch up with those zeros. And so I think that's a reason why they're back to that zero amount, because that 30% was a pretty big increase in 2024. You can see here the historical collection for those BID fees is around, it fluctuates depending on how many businesses and what type of business and how many employees they have, but it fluctuates around $90,000 to $100,000 a year. We did ask for their fund balances. Their operating fund balance at the end of 23 was $60,000, and their facade fund balance was $3,500. Again, options for this particular outside agency is to fund at their request from the city dollars of $140,000, which would be $80,000 for operating and $60,000 for facade grant dollars. Option 2 is you could authorize the supplement for operating only at $80,000 and transition the facade grants into the CID funding, or you could choose to fund at a different amount the city commission deems appropriate. I will say, for this particular one, the other decision point we need to make is whether we affirm that the Lee District fee should be a 0% increase. That item will come back to you in ordinance form. We're required to pass that by ordinance. So during the budget process, once you give us that direction, that'll come back to you to pass an ordinance for that. So is there any discussion or questions on that particular agency?
And if I could add, the possibility of transitioning to CID would involve an amendment to the master developer agreement. As you know, we've had conversations about the financial performance of the Starbond District and the CIDs and the availability of funds for shade structures. I think there's an opportunity in the near future to kind of revisit the financial performance and the provisions of that master agreement. My suggestion would be fund them this year out of budget, and then between now, as we have that broader conversation about financial performance and use of any of those funds for additional purposes, we can kind of roll that into a reopening of that master development agreement if we want to.
Because Debbie, I believe you said some of these come out of the sales tax economic development funds that we collect,
Yes.
correct? And again, I think our downtown has been a driver of some of our economic development, so I think we need to continue. I guess my only question would be on the facade grant. Seemed like that ran low fairly early this year. Have we had requests that we've not been able to fund? A thumbs up or thumb down would be good. I see, or here comes Leslie. Because I know that's been a really good program for the downtown, and I guess that would be my question.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Hoppick. Leslie Bishop, Executive Director of Salina Downtown. We did go through the facade in 24 or 23 fairly quickly, and we have, we provided 2 facade grants already this year for 24. We have another one going before our Board of Directors this week, and then it'll go before a board vote the following week. We did have one facade grant that was granted, but the owner of the building did not fulfill his obligation to us in getting that facade grant or that facade improvements done in the year that he had to do it. And so we made numerous attempts to give him, have him give us a reason why or an extension, because our board would have entertained that, but he did not. So that money, which I think was about $17,000, is back in the facade grant pool, if
So
you will.
now you have the 3 plus the 17, so you do.
Well, and that 3 was at year end of 2023, so
True.
that doesn't reflect this
Right.
year's
Right,
disbursement.
this year's right. But,
And then
but
we
it
did
seemed like we were eating that 60,000 up fairly quickly last year. And it
Yeah,
seemed like
and
halfway through the year we were-
I project there to be 3 more businesses that I've been in contact with that will be taking advantage of the facade grant funding if it's approved through our board. So that surplus of that 17 will go, will go away. It has been, you're correct, we are one of the only main streets in Kansas that offers this facade funding, and we're for that very grateful.
Okay.
Any other questions for me?
How big an area does the Lee District cover?
So it goes all, I don't know in terms of exact square footage, but we go from Elm all the way to Prescott, and then we have all the side, so that all the cross streets, a portion of 4th, 5th, 7th, and a portion of 8th Street.
Okay. I didn't know if it was just Santa Fe or,
And the way that the BID fees are structured, if you're on Santa Fe, that's considered the employment district. And so that's based on your square footage, business district. That's based on your square footage of your building. And then in the other outlying areas of the BID district, it's your BID fees are dictated by how many employees you have, plus a base fee on both.
any other comments or questions?
Thank you.
I'd be for keeping funding where they've requested. Also, I would be in favor of the BID fees not being increased this year. I know the property taxes, when you're a commercial property, you have that 25% multiplier instead of 11.5 you have on residential. When you're looking at some of your small businesses downtown, trying to keep them going, that's a fairly significant expense on a monthly basis. And not increasing that BID fee is okay with me for this year.
Yeah, we don't want to push people out because they
Yeah.
can't afford to do business down there.
So then consensus is to authorize the funding as requested at $140,000 and affirm that the recommendation of 0% increase on the fees?
Yes.
Okay,
Concur.
thank you. Our third agency request is from OCCK. This is the 16th year that OCCK is providing public transportation in the city of Salina, as well as a paratransit system. There's a historical breakdown on slide 10. I will say, as far as the allocation between paratransit and fixed route, that was Debbie's attempt at taking the dollars from the following page and trying to put them in the pockets that they went in. So if they seem out of skew, they may be. I need to get those verified. The total dollar amount, however, being requested this year is $963,000. Over the amount that was approved from last year, which was $937,093, which is about a 2.76% increase. As you can see on slide 11, the breakdown of those costs and the support of the Department of Transportation. I forgot what that was. From the state of 70% of that support comes from them. So that slide on 11 is their total operating budget and requests for 2025. Slide 12 just gives you kind of an overview of what they provide, the number of routes. Paratransit, as they discussed, is provided on a pre-qualified basis. They do some subsidy medical transportation and things like that for eligible passengers. They do also provide 81 Connection, which is not funded by the city. It's not part of the cost of that they're requesting from the city, but they do provide that as an additional service, as well as many others that the city doesn't directly fund. The funding for this particular request comes from the general fund. And the options for this request are to authorize the requested level at $963,000, keep the funding at the 2024 level of $937,093, or take other action as City Commission may desire. And I would stand for questions, and I know there's representatives from OCCK here as well if you have questions about their programming.
Well, I was pleased to see that the bulk of the increase was due to the paratransit program. I can see that's a need and a service to our citizens that have no other way. Any other comments?
The percentage level falls within, what I think we should be looking at, but I don't know if we come to a point where that dollar amount, we're funding 25% of their total budget, so just something to keep an eye on.
How sustainable is that? Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, at some point, costs are gonna have to be contained because that has increased a lot.
Yep. I would say that increase does fall within what we have expected our departments to be in, which is a 3 to 5% increase. So that number does fall within that range.
But when you have, when you have a bigger number, it becomes a bigger dollar amount, so
Right.
it's a little, but I'm not sure we
Absolutely.
want to sustain a $35,000 to $50,000 increase every year either, so.
Correct.
Any comments from OCCK? Would concur to stick with this request?
For this year, yeah.
Okay. So the consensus is to authorize the funding at the requested level as requested at $963,000 for 2025. Our next agency is Salina Grace. So we started this agreement back in 2022 with Salina Grace to provide some services for homeless in the community, various services for them. We've listed those. They're all within the contract that we have with them. The agreement was entered into in 2022, had a 2-year self-renewal term. Could be terminated by any party upon a 30-day written notice. Salina Grace is requesting a $90,000 support for 2025, sorry, that should be 2025, which is a 25% increase over their 2024 amount, which was $75,000. They did provide some data at the June 10th study session about the number of meals, the number of clients, the types of clients and things and such that they had provided. The historical funding has been $45,000 the first year, $60,000 the second, $75,000 in 2024 was approved, and they're requesting $90,000, which is a 20% increase over 2024 in 2025. Their total budget is about $515,000, of which the support they're asking the city to provide is about 17.4% of that total budget. And the options provided here for you are to authorize the funding at the requested level of $90,000 for 2025, keep the funding at the 2024 level of $75,000. You could authorize the budget allocation and request that the terms of the agreement and the services and performance be reviewed prior to renewing that agreement. That would be something that we would follow up with as we sign agreements. We typically sign agreements with each of these agencies, just spelling out what they've agreed to do and the amount of funding that we provided for them. That is an option for this particular agency, or you could take any other action that the city commissions may seem appropriate. Are there any questions for myself? Or I know Chad Young's here from Salina Grace as well.
Commissioners, you're going to see that agreement review option on a handful of the outside agencies that we kind of have automatic renewing agreements. I know in conversations with you, questions come up, and rather than make it a budget conversation, we could authorize the funding and then take up the conversation in greater detail before the agreement renewal. The ones that come to mind are Salina Grace, Salina Tennis. I had another one on the tip of my tongue, but you'll see them as we go through. But, and I would also say that there's ongoing conversations at the staff level with Salina Grace and other outside parties trying to assess kind of our services, our needs, what our experiences are, what our gaps are. And so you'll see as part of the general fund budget, I'm suggesting just a placeholder of funds without an allocated purpose, recognizing between now and the end of 2025, there's going to be ongoing conversations about our homelessness response, and there may be need for funding for other purposes above and beyond Salina Grace. And so trying to address their funding request here and then leave some financial capacity for unknowns out in the future.
Well, I wish that the issues that Salina Grace deals with would miraculously improve and not be needed, but it's not going to. And I don't think the city is in a position to provide the services they are. I'd like to hear from Mr. Young a little, if you could, a little update about your new facility and how that's going and what additional services you've been able to provide.
Sure. So in April 1, we opened at our new facility at 315 South Broadway, right there between Ace Hardware and Community Corrections. I'm going to be very honest, the transition was a little rough. It didn't go as smoothly as we had hoped. It wasn't. Certainly there was several issues, whether it was with the renovations that we needed to do to the existing facility, and as well as getting all of our clientele to transition to the new facility, some of which have chosen not to make that transition to the new facility. But we keep reaching out. We keep going out into the downtown area, and we keep having communications with those, encouraging them to get help. Unfortunately, one of those members who's been in the downtown area for several years passed away last week due to his issues. That's not what any of us want to see. We want them to get the help, and our goal is to make it as easy as possible for them to transition into getting that help. Our numbers have started returning more to where they were prior to moving. That first month, like I said, was very rough. The numbers were low at first, but they have since increased. We have on Tuesdays, we see over 100 people a day on Tuesdays alone. But we've been averaging anywhere between 50 to 60 people a day. We just hired a COO for Salina Grace, a professional who has come into our community named Sarah Went. She's originally from our community, moved away, has worked in human services, mental health services, and housing agencies for a number of years. And I'm very excited about her energy and her insight. She has worked in facilities like what Salina Grace is trying to do, but in larger cities. And she knows how they work, and she knows how to organize them. And she is just taking off on a mission with a passion, and we're very excited to have her. We're growing our partnerships, PEN, which provides payee services to those on disabilities and make sure that they are able to stay in their housing by paying their rent, utilities, and their basic upkeep fees. They have moved into the facility with us to reduce any barriers to that partnership. And since then, we've been able to help some of our folks transition into utilizing their services so that they can now stay housed. They have someone to help manage their money for them. We also have a partnership with Central Kansas Mental Health, bringing in their ACT team to the Resource Center. They will be stationing their ACT team out of the Resource Center, and so therefore providing that mental health care right there on location instead of having to get them to transition from our location over to where the mental health center is and reduce that barrier as well. So those are just a couple of steps that we've taken in the short time since we've been over there, and we're looking forward to continuing to increase those partnerships and presence from other agencies. The whole goal is to remove as many barriers as we can to make getting help easier for those who are oftentimes afraid to get help because we don't always know what that looks like. And that can be a scary thing to say, yes, I want change, but I don't know what change looks like. And so that's what our goal is, and that's my update. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And yes, I saw that it's a 20% increase this year over last year. Our intent is to become more self-sufficient over time. That is where our heart is. We just need some time to grow a support base. And that is exactly what our intent is to continue to work at growing our support base. To get this started, we had some what I would call starter grants, okay? They were one-time grants that gave us funding to help us get this going and off the ground. But now we have to move towards more sustainable long-term models. We know that there's limitations on what the city can provide, and we want to be good stewards of our resources here in the community as well. So we'll continue to work on building a broader support base.
So Chad, while you're at the microphone, is there things that individuals, organizations, businesses, or churches can be doing to help?
Yeah, and some have started. Some businesses, individuals, and churches have already started financially supporting the efforts. There are people who are donating items that we would otherwise need to purchase, and there are people who are very interested and engaged in volunteering and providing their time and labor to helping us keep our labor costs down as well. We're also doing a gaps analysis, and that's something that you referred to a minute ago. The city's doing a gaps analysis, and so are we. So as we're working with our clientele, we're trying to identify what are the roadblocks that we're having. What are the issues that keep coming up that prevent us from getting the help? Is it a lack of resources somewhere in our community? Is it the trouble getting to those resources? Or is it the individual just not willing to take the resources? The reality is it's a little bit of all of those, but we need to be able to better clarify what those gaps are, where they exist, and why they exist.
Did we ever receive the point-in-time data?
I was told that that data should be available now online. I was just told that last week. I have not seen it yet.
And the last I heard, we're part of a continuum of care that's basically outstate Kansas. So there are individual metro areas that their information's out, and it was about the same time last week that we hadn't seen it yet, but we were hoping it would be forthcoming.
Yeah.
And this budget, that covers the resource center and the overnight winter shelter, correct?
Yes, the amount we're asking for helps with both the resource center and the overnight shelter.
And I think I recall discussing possibly extending that shelter time frame a little.
That's an ongoing discussion.
Any comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you, and I appreciate y'all for the help that you've given. Thank you.
Don't have any questions. Oh, sorry, that. Don't have any questions, but in 3 years, we've doubled that budget. So, we, again, 33, 25, 25% increases, if we were doing like we've asked our own departments to do, you'd be given like a 7% increase. It'd be a 5,000 increase instead of 15. So, just need to reach out, and some of our churches and some of those I think can kind of take this project on. And bad thing is I don't see our homeless problem in our community, and maybe this is just part of society, but our homeless problem doesn't seem to be getting any better. In fact, here I'd say in the last 30, 60 days we've seen it actually increase significantly in some places. So we'll just need to keep an eye on all that. So, but for this year, yeah, I'd be okay with going ahead and funding that.
And
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment that I'm encouraged by the end goal to be self-sufficient. That definitely a positive direction that I appreciate. The collaborative efforts with other entities, I think, is going to be gratefully. It's going to be very helpful, and I'm glad to see that. And it's, I think, it's this summer. It's definitely, we've been seeing more homeless, but hopefully, with the new facilities and this new approach, we're going to see positive change, and I'm optimistic about that. And I guess if we don't see that change, we can have a different conversation next year. But I think with the transition that's going on, I think it seems reasonable to accommodate that request.
And I always come back to Salina is not immune to society's problems, and we're no different than any other community. And I don't think the city would be very good at providing these services, even if we did have the ability. Our budget would probably triple.
I like that. Kind of concur with Greg, how some of the services are moving into the Salina Grace facility. That was one of the visions, I think, with Julie Orlando coming to town, had mentioned having a one-stop shop for everything. So it'd be nice to see that continue. I'm kind of with you guys. The transition and everything was, I say, we just give another year to see if hopefully they can become more self-sufficient on it.
Yeah, and what the public sees is what's going on the streets. We don't see and hear the success stories.
Yes.
So. I would-
Actually, that does prompt a question that I have regarding the reunification efforts. Are those going in a good direction, or is that kind of just something that's stalled out? sorry to bring you back up.
Could you clarify when you say the reunification?
Just efforts to get subjects, that maybe are from out of town, like if they have family, friends from an area they're from originally, trying to get them. Because, I know that we have a lot of people in town that we service, but I don't think there's any secret that we do end up pulling in, people from western Kansas, north central Kansas, et cetera. And it's just the nature of, we have the services and people are going to kind of gravitate that direction.
So I don't have the numbers with me, but I'm going to try to remember them as best as I can off the top of my head. I believe it's over 50 individuals who've come to Salina that we have helped them get back home, and it's cost us somewhere in the $5,000 range. It's about an average of about $100 a ticket on average. When we start looking at that as far as cost goes, because some of them are not that far from where home really is.
Sure.
And others are a lot further from where home really is. So we have been actively working. If somebody has a support system, a family support, something that we can verify, then we will help them to get home. But we have to be able to verify that information. We're not going to just be buying bus tickets and sending people wherever. I don't like it when people do that to us, and I certainly wouldn't do that to someone else.
I agree. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
sure.
Do we concur with this increase?
So that would be option one, just to authorize it, or would you want to have some verification of performance later in the year, or are you satisfied with that at this point?
Oh, I think as the year goes on, I'd like to hear updates and see how things are going.
But the terms of the agreement and what we have said is okay? Okay, so I would consider that just authorizing that at the $90,000 level for 2025. The next agency is Salina Tennis. As you know, we signed an agreement with Salina Tennis to manage and operate the tennis facilities in 2022. Again, this agreement is a renewal, and it can be terminated by either party if on or before September 1st of the operating year, to be effective at the end of that particular operating year. The historical funding has been $40,000 a year for all of 23-24, and that is the request for 25, which is a 0% increase. Again, your options are to authorize the fund as requested at $40,000, to authorize the budget allocation and request the terms of the agreement with Salina Tennis, and the services and performance be reviewed prior to renewing the agreement for 2025, or to take other action as city commission may deem appropriate. I'm not sure. Not here? Okay. And Clark's not here today, so if you have questions,
I would say that
Jeff would answer them.
I would say that the conversations are ongoing with staff and Salina Tennis as they kind of get their feet under them in terms of the operations. So I think we shared previously that they weren't fully staffed in 2023, so we've talked about an adjustment in terms of the, rather than returning funds to us, just a lesser compensation in 2024. And then I do think we have an opportunity as we wrap up 2024, headed into 2025, to revisit kind of those assigned responsibilities, everything from cleaning bathrooms to mowing to trash pickup to programming, and then we could take another look at this number and see if it reflects the service levels that we end up at. But for budget purposes, I think $40,000 is what Salina Tennis has requested. You could go ahead and budget that, and then staff can report back to you before year end and in terms of agreed upon responsibilities and whether that changes that number.
Because you stated you believe there's probably a refund coming back to us from the 2024
Yeah,
activities, I would guess.
Well, rather than a refund, there's an agreement of just a lesser distribution in 2024, reflecting 2023 was not
So it's
a full.
budgeted, so that, those dollars would just stay in the general,
Right.
in the general budget then? Okay.
Yep.
I'd like to know what that is whenever that happens.
Okay.
That's,
Did the restrooms get finished up?
Yeah, and I'll let Jeff speak to that, but
Jeff Hammond, Director of Parks and Recreation. Yeah, we finished last week, actually prior to the holiday. We finished up the bathrooms, met with Salina Tennis Alliance for them to take responsibility for those bathroom spaces. And they're working on getting soap, toilet paper, things lined out for the material that would support those bathrooms. So,
So we're not gonna clean them or stock them or anything?
the conversations we had with STA was that it's their responsibility. They have contracted cleaning already set up. I think they're working on the material, the supplies that would go in to support that operation. Making sure they have access to soap and toilet paper, a vendor that would provide that to them so they can hand that over to their contracted cleaning. And
Even
they
the
would-
one outside of the courts?
I'm sorry, sir.
Even the restroom outside
I
of the
know
courts?
those year-round, the year-round bathroom, those are still city responsibility. Our park staff address those and take care of those.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Does the city receive revenue from like the state tennis tournaments or any of those?
Jeff, do you want to speak to that as well?
I'm gonna make you sit down every time.
No, those are solely set up and operated by Salina Tennis, and fees are collected by them. We don't have any fees being collected relating to that. We did have a relationship with them for this summer for a tennis camp that was sponsored by us for them to staff, and we did collect fees for that, but that's the only fees that we would collect.
And I don't know if you know the answer to this, but like state high school tournament is a high-profile event, but it's not necessarily a moneymaker between putting the tournament on and CVB's assistance. I know they were looking for sponsors and financial assistance for the event, but
But it would bring,
yeah, it'll definitely,
taxpayers
it'll bring
to
people to
Salina,
town for
yeah.
sure. Yep.
Right.
So essentially, all the city is doing to maintain that facility is mowing, is that right?
Mowing the areas outside of the tennis facility and on the east end where that large expanse of grass is, which just got seeded recently after Public Works' efforts to flatten it out.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Yeah, I would concur with the requested amount.
So authorize the funding at the requested amount, $40,000 for 2025. The next agency is the Salina Economic Development Organization. This is a nonprofit that was created by agreement in 2015. The historical funding for that is on slide 20. We fund them in like a 3-year cycle, so we typically approve that on 3-year basis. The last 3-year cycle was 2022, 23, and 24. That funding was at $275,000 from the city. $35,000 was approved by the county and $50,000 by the Salina Airport Authority for that funding period. For 2025 through 27, SCEDO was asking for $300,000 from the city in 25, $325,000 in 26, and $350,000 in 27. As they reported last week, the county approved maintaining their $35,000 funding level for the next 3 years. And Salina Airport Authority is also maintaining their $50,000 level for the next 3 years. So the options here that we've provided for you is to authorize the funding at the requested levels of $300,000 for 2025, $350,000 for 2026, and $375,000 for 2027. You could authorize a funding increase equal to the general fund revenue estimate that we've provided to you, which is about 7.5%, which equals about a $20,625 increase per year. You could authorize funding at the 2024 level of $275,000, or you could take other action as you might deem appropriate.
Comments?
Do we have, we've always done these in 3-year increments. That's not a requirement of ours, is it? Or is that just, is our agreement with them written that way?
It currently is, but it could be written in different increments, and it's subject to review. So if you as the governing body had a desire to make that annual or make that some other timeframe, that could be built in.
I'd be willing to do the 300, but I don't know if I'm willing to go to the 325 and 350 without some additional documentation as to how those dollars are being spent myself. That's just kind of my thought process.
Yeah, the agreement could certainly identify the funding for the coming year and then make the additional year subject to additional review and approval. If that's, it could assume a baseline and the increases are subject to review and approval, or it could assume entire ratification on an annual basis, whatever you prefer.
I'd be in agreement with that.
Yeah, I think I would prefer to do it year by year. I really don't want to agree to this stepped increase. It's quite a bit.
Do we know what the increase is for, or is it just?
Yeah, they distribute it to their board, and I could get you that. It's pretty incremental increases across different line items, wages and health insurance, and as you look at it, as I reviewed the budget, I didn't see any sizable new initiatives being funded, sizable changes. It was incremental increases and just ongoing expenses.
I think doing the 300, we've talked about that marketing position. Does that fall under EDO? Does that fall under chamber?
Right.
I think there's still some question as to where that's going to go.
So what I hear you saying, so 3-year agreement, funding level at $300,000, and any increases in subsequent years subject to review and approval, or 1-year agreement subject to annual review?
Which is easier for staff? I'm okay with the 3-year agreement with the 1 year with a.
I think that's probably
That's
more
the way I would do it,
reassuring
yeah.
to the
Them,
EDO
yeah.
and all, that adds a little bit more certainty, and we can just make the budget request subject to review.
That's fine with me. We kind of make everybody else come back and give
Right.
us justification for the increase. I'm not sure why they would be different, so.
Okay.
Well, I would like to see the county and the airport put in a little more rather than put it all in the city.
Or either of those entities asked for more as well?
They were. I don't know what the ask of the airport authority was, but the county was.
County was asked for 50 and stayed at 35, if
Yeah.
I remember right.
Yeah, and I think I'm just stating a fact here, but not to pick a fight. But part of that conversation is what's everyone's sales tax level rate and property tax rate, and when we have economic development success, how's that impact the agencies? And I would tell you, it impacts the agencies more proportionally than this funding scenario is currently set up.
Do you have your answer?
So, yep,
Okay.
I would confirm that we're authorizing the 300,000 in 2025, but not the future funding, and that they'll be required to come back for requests for the additional funding in the following 2 years.
Yes.
Yep.
Concur.
The next one on here is Skyfire. This isn't one we typically bring to you because it's a very small amount. In the past years, it's been $5,000 under the city manager's approval, basically. But last year, Ambucks used to do this as a city community event. Last year, they chose to step out, and JRI Hospitality stepped up and took this community event on. We did provide them with funding, the funding that was supposed to go to Ambucks in 2023. We actually provided that to JRI for 2023, and 2024 at a $5,000 level. They did come back this year with a request with a whole explanation that I provided you. We did not ask them to come forward and give a whole scenario or have a discussion with you. But basically, they're asking for a $12,500 cash contribution for 2025, as well as providing disposal service for the field area that's provided around there. I did have a conversation with them last week and explained to them that that's not something the city provides normally to commercial services, and that would cost us. We would have to go out and purchase that service as well, and they were okay with that. They just thought if we provided that service that they would, as part of our business, that they would request that. So they're certainly comfortable with us not taking that additional expense on for ourselves, and they'll just do that out of their funding. So the options we provided for you are to authorize the cash-only contribution of $12,500 for 2025. We could go ahead and support them with the $12,500 and the disposal services, which would cost the city about $1,000. We could authorize the level of funding at $5,000, which was what the 2024 level was, or we take other action as you might find appropriate.
One thing that did occur to me over the weekend as I was, kind of seeing the information about Skyfire was, I think if you wanted to, you could request a sponsorship recognition commensurate with the contribution. They just kind of seem to have all sponsors listed, kind of equal billing, where then maybe they'll get a larger sponsor, but our sponsorship is considerably more than the $1,500 they're asking from others. If that's important to you as a governing body, we could ask for some proportional level of recognition.
And they did provide us with signs this year that showed that we were a supporter of Skyfire, so.
Well, I kind of wanted an update on how the event went and what the general feeling in the community is if this is something they want.
Mm-hmm.
Come on up, man.
Camille Elmore, representing JRI Hospitality. Special projects, so this was my project that I took on from Ambox last year. We have, our marketing team has Facebook page that we started last year called Salina Skyfire. You can look on there at all the positive comments. We've had a lot of great feedback on this year's show. The arrangement, the parking, everything. We've had a lot of positive feedback that it was the best they've actually seen in a long time. What I did last year, we took it on totally last minute and just pretty much said we'd write the check for the fireworks, just to make sure that we didn't have a hiccup, and we continued the show. Talked to a lot of area businesses and getting their support, and they were willing to do a 3-year commitment instead of me going back every year and asking them. So it's worked out really well. I've had the 10 businesses that have committed to the 3-year, and the city was also a part, like you mentioned, of that same social media, advertising, the flags, the window clings, all of that at the same level. Absolutely, if we are equal partners, it would then be the JRI, City of Salina, JRI Hospitality, Salina Skyfire show. But last year, when we had varying levels, I had a 500, a 1,000, a 1,500, 2,500. It really was kind of complicated. It's a quick show, it's a quick event, so it just made more sense to just have partners at the same level and just keep it simple. And it worked out really well. All of the partners were very happy. They all had the opportunity, and I had actually a lot of comments from the community seeing those flags all around town that they were able to put out weeks in advance, partner of Salina Skyfire. So we've had a lot of great feedback from that. Definitely the trash service, which I didn't know until I visited with her. We have that taken care of, and actually I was able to negotiate that down to $400 from a company. Also for just making sure that the Salina Skyfire happens, they were willing to just do it at cost. So that's been taken care of. So it's more that we're trying to reach out to to you all as the city representative for the city show to be an equal partner with us for, obviously, with equal representation, so. If you have any
Seems
questions.
reasonable to me. I don't feel compelled to, if our contribution is larger to, what are we gaining from it? Essentially, we're not a business. We're not advertising anything. It's more, to me, this has been a staple of Salina culture for as long as I've been, or as long as I can remember. And to me, that seems like a small price to keep it going, especially in light of the aforementioned funding changes with AMBUC. So, to me, it seems unreasonable to require a larger sponsorship.
I, for one, say I have nothing compared to. I haven't been to the actual up there in a long time, but went this year and it was outstanding. The fireworks were just phenomenal. So, it, like Greg said, it's been around. It's been a staple of Salina forever, and I don't really see a problem with it either.
Well, I am happy. I will compliment you on the flags. I did notice them, and
Oh, good.
it's nice to see the businesses giving back, and I think that's kind of where the city is, giving back to people. So I would concur with this.
Some of you asked me about the cost of fireworks and kind of surprised by the
sight.
amount. Well, what I would tell you, having been in a community quite some time ago where the city put it on, these numbers appear reasonable to me. If you have a sense of how much fireworks cost and the show that you're getting for the money, that doesn't seem out of line to me.
Well, I just kind of wondered, with the amount of fireworks people were shooting themselves, if anyone watched the big show.
Right.
I think we all had a mini sky fire in our neighborhoods, but that's just a whole other
Mine wasn't as
story.
bad this year for whatever reason. But, I
That's-
attribute it to the fact that maybe budgets are a little tighter and fireworks have gone up. But
So, no, I think we approve this. I think it's just our part of being a, partner in the community with the others. So, thank you for doing that.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for JRI taking this on, because
Sure. Jason, I have to tell you, his motto is collaboration, definitely, not competition. So I appreciate you collaborating with us
Yep.
on this.
thank you.
So the consensus I hear is to go ahead and authorize the contribution for 2025 at $12,500. The next one we typically don't bring to you either, but we've decided to bring this forward just for your consideration, is the Salina Municipal Band. We've been providing support for them for over 70 years. You can see from the funding history that funding amount has not gone up very much since 2016. They are requesting a $25,000 supplement this year, which is it's a $5,000 increase over 2024, which has been that way since 2017. So it does support the band, the conductor. It gives them a small stipend for their musicians, and they do provide 11 Tuesday night concerts at Ericstein Stage. They put on special performances at the Smoky Hill River Festival and the Tri-Rivers Fair Parade. So this, again, is one of those city staple performances that the Salina Band has been performing for years and years and years. So the options are to authorize at their requested $25,000 level for 2025, authorize the 2024 funding level at $20,000 for 2025, or to take other action as the city commission may desire.
Comments? Well, I will say the play day in the park on Thursday. This is the first time I'd heard the band in a long time, and they sounded really good. Impressive. And had a discussion with a 30-year member of the band who about this request, and he said one of the biggest increases they've seen is purchasing music. So, yeah, I think it's something we should continue to fund, and I agree with the request.
Any other objections to that? So authorize the funding at the 2025 at $25,000. The next agency request was kind of new to us in the last couple of years. The Salina Area United Way has gotten involved in a program to help support childcare. They've given several presentations to the City Commission, done a lot of research, done a lot of work about childcare and the needs for childcare in Saline County. They did come to you with a request at the June 10th study session. Their request was $500,000 annually for the first 5 years for a total of $2.5 million. $300,000 of that would be put to an endowment to support the program going forward. After 5 years, they would, their request was to reduce that annual allocation by $100,000 until the final allocation was $100,000 for a total of $3 million over 10 years. I wanted to remind the commission, because some of you were and some of you weren't here, back in 2022 when the city received ARPA dollars, the city commission at that time went through and kind of made some allocations of where they thought that funding might be helpful in the future. And one of those areas was childcare. And that, at that point, they had set aside $500,000 to be set aside for childcare issues in the future. So when this request came, staff wanted to remind you of that allocation that's still available from ARPA funding of $500,000. Staff has not identified a source for any funding beyond that $500,000. So that's just information for you. So our recommendation would be that we go ahead and authorize the 2025 funding amount of $500,000, but take that from the ARPA funding that we had set aside. Or you could take other action that you may find appropriate. And I know the representatives from United Way are here as well.
Comments?
Yeah, I would agree with the $500,000 from the ARPA funds that we have set aside. We've already discussed that going to child care, and then further discussion and how that whole child care scenario moves forward, I think is, I'm not sure at this point I'm willing to tie other commissions down for the next 10 years. I would prefer that we kind of look at it on a shorter time frame than they're requesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd say we authorize the $500,000 from this year to hopefully buy us a year to kind of come up with some. I mean, it's still a problem, still a need. So maybe that'll give us a little more time to come up with some funding or some compromise or something on it.
Yeah, I would concur with the using the ARPA funds, but I also think the ask over this time period is a little excessive, and we don't have an identified funding source. I think I would agree to maybe in the future fund at a level like some of our private employers are doing based on their employment to provide child care to their employees.
Well, unfortunately, the thing about this issue is that it's kind of a quality of life thing. There's kind of a non-quantifiable in terms of if you're trying to bring people to the community and you're bringing them with jobs and housing, et cetera, and this is another component or another piece of the puzzle, so to speak. But it's still frustrating that we have to kick that much into the kitty. I mean, are we thinking just for the 5 years and then reassess from there, or what were your thoughts?
Just the one, do the $500,000 this year, and then we'll have to analyze it for next year, I should say, for 2025. We have the $500,000 ARPA funds that we've already set aside for child care. I think we do that, and then we'll have to analyze it.
Seems reasonable to me. Just I have a feeling we're going to be in the same spot next year, but hopefully not.
And this is another societal thing that everyone's dealing with. And I don't know that just throwing money at the issue is gonna totally solve it. Would you like to update us on how things are going?
Christina Small, Executive Director at the Salina Area United Way. Well, we just got another business on board. We've got Xline that has committed to $6,000 annually for the next 5 years. We are in contact with Schwann's again. We met with them at the beginning of June. They were hoping to have something to us by the end of June, but I haven't. The contact was out of office that last week, so I haven't heard back on that. I went to county meeting last week, and they are not allocating any funding to childcare as well. And then the governor had 60 million put into our budget for childcare funding for this next year, and that was not passed. When we went to Salina at the State House, they were talking about it while a legislator had his grandson there because of no childcare, but it didn't get passed. Due to they feel like the grant funding they gave out this year didn't produce enough childcare slots to justify continuing that. I feel like that was just a lack of education on their part. One of the last grants they came out with was like $43 million in funding that was passed down from the federal government, and you had to have education, health, and job readiness. Those were the pieces that came down from the federal government, and the state just added childcare. They actually denied some applications due to focusing too much on childcare, so they didn't really want a whole lot of slots with that money, but that's kind of where we're at right now. We're holding steady. We opened our first round of grants at the beginning of this year. We had a little over $550,000 in requests. We were able to knock that down because some of the centers didn't have all of their staff on due to expansions that aren't complete yet. So we were able to knock that down. That number is quite a bit higher than what we originally presented at $460,000, and that is because Salina Child Care was not part of that number, but due to funding situations, they are needing help to maintain their current wages. So that is where we are.
So is the child care worker situation improving any?
So out of the 7 nonprofit centers that applied and are approved, there are only 2 staff openings right now. It has improved. I'm not including the one that hasn't opened its renovations yet.
That would
but
be at St. Mary's?
Yes, correct. But they have
called?
already do
Or
what?
What's the one at St. Mary's called?
Love and Learn.
Yeah.
Yes, they have already actually started receiving applications and slotting children for when their expansion opens. So they're already making headway for that. It's creating quite a few infant slots for us, which is what was needed. But yeah, out of those 7 nonprofits, we only have like 2 vacancies, and there's no empty rooms other than the ones that aren't complete yet. And there's no open slots either. Like they have wait lists. They're fully staffed, fully, I guess, at their capacity, and they still have wait lists. So that's where we're at right now.
Well, sounds like we're making progress anyway.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So do we concur to allocate the ARPA funds, option 1?
Okay. Budget that appropriately. Okay, so that gets us through our outside agencies. The next section of this study session is for non-personnel budgeted funds. The first one, and our favorite, is the Sales Tax Capital Fund. So in the Sales Tax Capital Fund, we have, that is based on the 2016 initiative. There was a lot of promises and things made during that campaign of what that funding was going to be used for, and we tried diligently to make sure that we're meeting those expectations that were set back then. In the meantime, we have committed those funds in a couple of different ways. One I'll call legally committed, and that is a number that is fixed based on some agreement or contract that we have signed. Typically, that's a debt issuance. That's kind of the set aside for things that we really can't change. The other thing the other category I would call would be publicly committed, and that would be those that were promised at certain levels during that initiative. And to change that dollar allocation could reduce the scope, or it could effectively require us to cover some things with property tax burden. So what we try to do is create a fund balance pro forma, which is a type of a projection on slides 30 and 31. We'll get to those here in a minute. For what that fund is doing through the history of that tax that was initiated back in 2017, and it sunsets in 2036. But I wanted to give you the dollar allocations for those kind of legally committed, the ones we really don't have any change that we can make to those numbers because we do have a contractual commitment, and then the ones that are publicly committed that you really do have some leeway in how you allocate those dollars and where those dollars go. On the legally committed, we have supported the streetscape downtown debt from that at $695,000 a year. We have river renewal debt issued already for about $429,000. We just issued fire apparatus debt. That's about a little over $1 million a year. And then as part of that initiative, we had set aside some debt for some projects, the Firehouse Headquarters, Iron Avenue, Centennial Road, North Ohio, and some bicentennial or TPEC commitments. That bonding amount is $650,000. So we have a legally committed amount of about $2.8 million out of that sales tax capital fund. And then we have a whole list of items that were kind of publicly committed. 3.9% is the allocation that we have set aside for economic development, and that averages about $470,000 a year. That is set aside in a separate fund, which has a fund balance at the end of 2023 of about $940,000. The next commitment was for the River Renewal Project at $872,000. I know that number you think should be $1.3 million, but it is. If you take the debt that we've got committed and the $872, that gets us to the $1.3 million that we committed as the replacement of the Kenwood Park debt financing that was in the sales tax prior to that. Kenwood Cove maintenance, the 2025 allocation is set at $364,000. That's as a result of the 10-year plan. That's typically averaging about $250,000, and that's kind of where we rest that number when we don't have specific planning out in the future. Vehicle and equipment purchase, we have a 2025 allocation of $2 million. Fleet management, which is our enterprise rental program, the fund balance in Kenwood Cove is about $150,000, and in vehicles and equipment is about $900,000. Fleet management, which is our enterprise lease, we have a $300,000 allocation. That fund balance is about $753,000 at the end of 23. Street improvements, we have a $4 million allocation in 2025. That fund balance at the end of 2023 was a little over $1 million. Building and facility maintenance, we have scheduled an $850,000 allocation for 2025. That balance is at $945,000 at the end of 23. Park maintenance, $500,000. That balance is $705,000 at the end of 23. Capital planning, which is for, like if we have projects that we want to research or do some planning for, we set aside $100,000 out of sales tax capital for that annually. Hike and bike trails, we have an allocation of $75,000. And then property tax stabilization, we have set aside $1 million for a total of a little over $10.5 million of publicly committed dollars out of the sales tax capital fund. Then the next two slides is kind of our pro forma of what we anticipate, kind of our cash flow of what we anticipate that fund to do with these commitments as they're stated in 2025 and as we anticipate them to be through the 2036 sales tax year. So we kind of split those out by category, and it shows you overall with a 1.5% revenue increase in 2025 and a projected 0.5% increase in sales tax revenue, going forward after 2025, we can sustain these commitments through the 2036 model, year-end sunset year, leaving a significant fund balance in there after some of these pay off and the revenue increases significantly. I will say we do have a few commitments after 2036, so we will have to be mindful as we go forward, as we see some of this. If we see this come to fruition and these fund balances are increasing significantly, we'll need to leave that funding in that balance to pay those commitments after that sales tax commitment, or that sales tax sunsets in 2036, if it doesn't get renewed at that time. One thing we did want to bring forward, because parks is a huge part of this, we just kind of wanted to give you an overview of where their plan was. I did mention we have an allocation of $500,000 in there for 2025, and their fund balance at the end of 2024 or 3 was $700,000. Their projects that they've been working on in 2024 is the Phase 3 concrete, which is concrete in various parks. They're working on bathroom renovations. They have one at Kenwood and one at Oakdale. They also are working on fencing at various parks. In 2025, their focus is going to be Phase 4 of concrete, 3 more bathrooms in the bathroom renovation project, painting at various parks, the Jerry Ivy Park project, which would include the water feature, also the sand volleyball and some other improvements there. Regrading James Matson Field and the Berkeley Family Recreational Area dugouts. Those are kind of their concentrations for 2025. And we talk a lot about, on the next slide, the park master plan that came out, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and that whole list of projects. This is just a list of projects that are still, the remaining major items that are still out there and what their status is, just for your information. There are several in here that are high dollar items that we'll have to pre-plan for, but we wanted to just give you kind of a list of where those items were. There's also some items that have been added as things come up, as things are viewed or citizens give us feedback on particular items. So there's some items that have been added to this list, but it shows that there's been a lot of progress made on that plan, that master plan, and there's still quite a bit to do, but just kind of where they are and what their projections are for those particular items.
Item I didn't see on the list is we discussed a new dog park, possibly behind the animal shelter or over at Sunset Park.
That is definitely in the planning. I don't know that it got flagged as a major project, but yes, at the animal shelter in particular.
And I would also like to emphasize maintaining the dog parks we have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
One of the things I talked to Mr. Scragg about this morning is and I know it's on here, is you have the Jerry Ivy Park project, but I think we really need to address the splash pad at Jerry Ivy sooner than later. Again, that's, from what I understand, is going to be out of commission for the entire summer of 2024, and that's a facility that I drive by on a daily basis in the summer, and it's used, it was used a lot. So I know we've talked about another water feature in this, but I really think we need to budget and try to get some plans and get that something up and running by next year, by next spring.
I agree, because you go by there now and you see a lot of sad faces.
Yeah, that functionality and the challenge caught us by surprise. We looked at it in terms of, is there some type of temporary repair, but there was a lot of pipe failure below the ground. So we are proceeding as if that's a complete new construction of a spray ground. The consultants that we've engaged for the water feature portion of replacing the pond, we've added this to their task list as well. So we'll be bringing back a design contract with them to address the pond water feature as well as spray ground. And
I think the pond feature, I see that being a 2 to 3 year project, the way we move, I see the splash pad being a separate project.
We can work with them in terms of timeline. We're committed to spray ground being up and running
Yeah,
next
20
year.
to 25, yeah, so, okay, that's my main thing, is I think that, that serves the entire public. I know we have 2 others in town, and they get used, at a lot, and I'd like for us to, and I don't know how old those are and what the lifespan is on those. I think we need to kind of keep an eye on that, so we can keep those in working condition.
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 15, 16 years old. I had in my head it was younger than that, but
Water features are always hard to maintain, and I know we've got a lot of use out of what we have, so.
It was 2006. I'm guessing on the date, but it was 2006 or 7 when Jerry Ivy was installed.
Yeah, so.
I felt like that was on my first go-around in the Parks and Rec Advisory Board in the early 2000s when I didn't know the exact date either, but I know it goes back quite a ways.
I think those have been money well spent for the community, and I'd like to continue to see those to keep.
And I'm sure that these spray grounds have improved since then.
The other thing that I was talking to the city manager about is there's some opportunity perhaps to, we have some park ground over by Glenifer Hill, and there's some interest in. There's some other private ground next to it that could be developed. There's what I call an older playground, some equipment over there at that Glenifer Hill area. And I think that it'd be advantageous if we replaced that and put the new, if we have any interest in this, putting it over at Indian Rock. It's just across the street, and Indian Rock has restrooms available. They have, picnic areas, and I think it would be a lot used considerably more than it is now, I think, if we put it over there at Indian Rock. So that's something I'd like for us to look at as a commission.
Is that the cities or the school districts?
That's ours.
Is it?
It's,
Yeah.
if it's the cities, and I'm very pleased that we've been able to put together a playground replacement schedule and funding source. So Parks has something identified, and we've had a little bit of a conversation about the timing of all that. So I think there's an opportunity to do what you've described, and then the proceeds from that property might actually help
Yeah, I think
fund
the
it.
sale from that ground may help. I don't know if it'd fully cover it, but it would surely help pay for some of that upgraded equipment at
It
Indian Rock.
is very close proximity to the Lakewood playground.
And we've had that conversation as well. Looking at kind of the distribution of the playgrounds and then the function that they serve as well. We have, and I'm not going to get the terminology right, but we have neighborhood playgrounds, and then we have regional playgrounds. And so part of I think Parks' thinking for the Indian Rock was possibly an inclusive playground with some features dedicated to be inclusive play equipment for disabled. But we can certainly look at that timeline. With it being parkland, as you well know by now, there's an added process to
Well,
do
I
land
kind of thought
transactions.
Commissioner Hoppick was going to bring up the idea of putting a spray park
Oh.
in there, because
No.
there's, I guess it's close to Kenwood Cove, but there's nothing over there.
That's
It's true. I guess the first step in all that
That is
is
an underutilized park over there.
It is.
So that's, yeah, I hadn't thought of that, so.
I think the first step in all that is kind of proceeding with that vision of moving it across the street to Indian Rock and freeing up the park ground. And staff's started to look into that a little bit in terms of the process and the ownership.
Sorry to get us off track.
Okay. Any other comments about the park plan? Good time to have it. So slide 34 shows you basically what our 2025 recommendation is for the sales tax capital fund. 1.5% increase in revenues, sales tax revenues, with the allocations that I mentioned in that slide before, the allocations of about $12.9 million, which would be utilizing fund balance that currently sits in that fund. The next fund is the Sales Tax Economic Development Fund. As I mentioned earlier, this is a 3.9% allocation from sales tax, the special sales tax. We're estimating that revenue will be about $472,000, which again is a 1.5% increase. The expenses in that fund, we're budgeting at a little over $573,000. That includes the $300,000 that SCEDO requested, the $140,000 that SDI requested, and it does cover the 2025 portion of the overnight flights that we approved here in 2024. The $400,000 that we were going to provide to Salina Airport Authority for the overnight flights. So that would be coming out of this fund and that fund balance.
And just as a clarification, that 3.9% is a percentage of the proceeds. It's not equivalent to 3.9% sales tax rate.
Right,
And then,
right.
as Debbie described,
Right.
this budget intentionally spends down that fund balance. When we have economic development projects or requests, we struggle to maintain this particular fund balance.
Correct. The next fund is the BID fund. We talked a little bit about that in the approval agencies. This fund does, the recommendation holds it at a 0% increase in fees. So as a rough estimate of $130,000 in revenue and income, this is a complete pass-through to the SDI, so that's no expenditures or revenue to the city. The next fund we're talking about is the tourism fund. That's transient guest tax. We kind of talked about this with Salina Chamber, but this fund does fund some other things. Besides the chamber, it funds operations at TPEC, it funds debt service at TPEC, and it also funds baseball or field improvements that we approved a year or so ago. The history of growth on here is on slide 37. I think it looks like we peaked in 2022. That looks like a very graphic graph, but that's a percentage increase graph, not a dollar graph. So we had still increased in 2023, but our percent of increase in 2022 was significantly higher because we had bottomed out so far in 2020. So don't get confused with that graph. But you can see by the bar graph or the stat graph on the bottom there, we're a little bit under collections in 2024 compared to 2023. We anticipate that number probably to come back and probably be about the same level as 2023. On an update for out of this fund is our Bill Burke project and our turf replacement. So we've presented this kind of pro forma to you before, kind of making sure that we're accumulating dollars for the replacement of turf, how we're accumulating that, how we're going to fund that. So this next spreadsheet kind of shows us what our anticipated revenue will be over the next 20 years or so for the turf replacement fund coming from transient guest tax. It has the transient guest tax revenue, the revenue from fees, the committed revenue contribution from the city, and an annual contribution that from the chamber. On the expense side, we have the debt service for the turf that we currently have financed. We have some construction costs that we're going to fund through for Bill Burke that we did not finance. We only financed about $2.3 million instead of the $2.5 million. So that leaves us the extra $180,000 out of this fund to fund whatever scope that we still had in that project. And it cash flows out that fund to see how we can fund those projects, that replacement, just as a verification that we believe, based on these assumptions, that fund is going to be able to support the replacement of turf for all of the fields that we have currently approved and paid for turf on.
Debbie,
And that's
that-
all coming out of transient guest tax.
Debbie, that 315,000 transient guest tax, that's, I noticed we carry that 315 through to 2043.
Yeah,
That's just a placeholder?
Yes.
At what point does the Homewood Suites transient guest tax come back on the books? I mean, that'll be fairly significant.
I believe that's part of the CID, which is 20 years. There's
Was it
20
the
and
full,
another
was
20,
it the full
22
20 or until they paid off so much? That's what I can't remember. Was there a
Well, there's
total
three
dollar?
there's three different
Yeah.
CA involved.
It's part of the Star Bond
and
dollars
I
is what
think
the
it when
transient
it
guest
pays
tax
off
is.
their-
So whatever happens in the Star
So
Bond.
that's what I was thinking. And the Star Bonds is running ahead
Mm-hmm.
of schedule, so at some point, that transient guest tax will no longer be going towards the Star Bonds and will be hitting our, and I.
Correct,
Right.
correct.
So,
It could.
so that 315.
This doesn't assume that's coming to
Right.
us at any time in that period of time.
So
But
what
you're
it-
right, it will.
What it also doesn't assume is any inflation in the cost of turf. We've kind of, just straight lined revenue and.
I'm trying to be
left-
positive.
Well, I do think what you've described is a bump above and beyond inflation that we do
Right.
need to take a look at. So-
And that money would be separated out amongst all of those pools. That
Right.
transient guest tax
Right,
that
but
comes
that
in. Yeah,
percentage
yeah.
that we're
The city, the-
capturing is gonna
yes.
be, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So-
So-
But it would increase this one.
And Debbie, feel free to correct me if I misstate anything here, but now the Bill Burke project's kind of coming to a close and we can see the remaining items to finish that punch list and the cost. We took a hard look at this and we feel like we're able to take the transient gas tax proceeds that have been received previously, the funds that were set aside for Bill Burke, apply those to Bill Burke, Dean Evans, Pestinger Family Field, in the immediate time frame, as well as the ongoing expense that we have. And we think that will cover all those expenses initially and replacement costs. The one thing that this no longer includes is sizable, significant drainage work at Berkeley Family Recreation Area. With the turf going in, with the under drains in the turf, and with our intended regrading of Matson Field next year, we want to see what the drainage looks like after we get done with all that. But we've been having a conversation for quite some time now about what funding sources are going to pay for all those improvements initially, and then our ability to cover that replacement cost. This scenario, I think, accounts for both of those. It funds Dean Evans, Berkeley, and Bill Burke improvements, Pestinger Family Field at the outset, and then it also provides for replacement on the schedule that's shown here.
I don't want to change the subject, but I got a couple questions and comments that I've been wondering about. Everyone's here. The solar installation at Kenwood Cove, is that operational?
Sorry, Jeff Hammond, Parks and Recreation Director. As of last week, it has not. We're still waiting for the punch-out portion where they do staff training about how to maintain it. It is not currently collecting any electricity and feeding that into our system at this time.
Well, it looks good anyway.
You know, if you don't start, you'll never finish. I don't know the timing of it all, but
Do you expect that in a matter of weeks, though? I mean,
Yeah.
they're getting very near.
Okay, well, I was just surprised how fast it went in. Also, now that we've got 2 baseball seasons down, has anyone evaluated how the turf is wearing and if it's performing as expected?
After the 4-year mark, there is a scheduled required warranty check-in for that Bill Burke project. There will be a testing of all 8 fields in various spots on all 8 fields to test that. It's called GMAX testing, and they check for the proper threshold of
cushioning.
cushioning. Yeah.
So, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but we made provision for replacement of high wear areas at Dean Evans Field, and that's actually, it hasn't been needed as quickly as we might have thought, and staff's assessment of the turf is we might be able to get a little bit more out of it before the replacement's needed. which is behind schedule, which is a good thing compared to what our initial assumptions were.
This would be year 4 at Dean Evans, wouldn't it?
Yes, when I was speaking of the 4-year, that was for Bill Burke.
Right.
However, there is a company in Kansas City who we have come out for various reasons to do field turf areas that need repair that we just can't do ourselves. They do that testing as well. So we could look at that sometime in the future to have someone like Dean Evans. If it's a 10-year lifespan, it makes sense to do it in the near future.
And the new Pestinger field, is it substantially complete now?
The field itself is substantially complete. The Salina Baseball Enterprises did sign off on allowing for use, public use, teams to play on it. The field itself is substantially completed, but the areas around that is still a work in progress.
The spectator area and all that?
Spectator area, grandstand is in the future, spectator areas, dirt work, seating. There's several items on the outskirts of the turf field itself that need to be addressed.
Yeah, it looks nice from what's finished. I'm sorry, I got off track there, but
That's okay.
it's questions I've had in my mind for a couple weeks now.
Yeah. So slide 39 is the Tourism Convention Fund budget, recommended budget at $3 million. This in itself is a pass-through as well, because all the funding of this gets passed through to the multiple of entities, whether it's the chamber or to TPEC or to ourselves for this funding of the baseball. So that is an in and an out. We are budgeting an additional $322,000, which was the fund balance, the anticipated fund balance in 2024, and that is that excess that was paid in advance of the debt payment on that collection of that sales tax for the field work. So that'll all go towards those projects and into that replacement fund. The next one is the Special Parks and Recreation. This is a third of the alcohol tax. This one is based on a schedule. The funding for this is based on a schedule that Parks has come up with. For 2025, their anticipated replacements are the Bill Burke Playground and the Kennedy, Kenwood Playground. So we're budgeting $200,000 at about $300,000 in revenue. And they also do that intentionally because you can see in their plan that there's some years they don't have any playgrounds planned, but then they'll have a large playground come into play that would not be supported by that current year's revenue.
And if we're going to accelerate Glenford Hill, we'll need to take a look at this schedule and rework that.
Yep. The next one is special alcohol, which is a third of the alcohol tax. This is a complete pass-through. It's a grant program that we run on a biannual basis. The current recipients are Ashby House, Central Kansas Foundation, the 28th Judicial District, and St. Francis. So this will be their second year in that biannual process, and 2025, or late in this year, we'll go out for another grant request and have them submit their grant requests and bring that back to you for allocation in 2025. We anticipate this revenue to be about $300,000 for special alcohol. The next fund on slide 42 is a special gas tax fund. The estimated revenue on this one for 2025 is about $2.2 million. Estimated expense is about 2.8. This is an intentional spend down of these funds because this is not a fund that we have a target fund balance on. It is street funding, whether it's operational for lights and things like that, maintenance, or for maintenance such as UBAS and things like that. That's what this fund is used for. And we spend what we get pretty much in this fund, but we want to make sure that we authorize ourselves enough to be able to spend the dollars that we do get. The next fund on this page is the Neighborhood Park Development Fund. These are funds that come from mortgage registrations or fees from, what are they?
Platting. I believe.
Platting fees, and a portion of that goes to the special fund. That funding has to be used in the area in which the plat was issued. So the neighborhood, for that particular neighborhood park. So Parks uses these funds if they need repairs in particular parks. They keep track of where the funding is. We just, again, we make sure we budget enough so in case a project comes available that they need to do, we have that available for them. So we're budgeting $45,000, which would basically use their entire fund balance if they needed it. TPEC is the next fund. This one, part of this budget comes from a transfer from the general fund. Part of this comes from transient guest tax, their portion of the transient guest tax. The expenditures on this is the reimbursement to Oakview for management of TPEC. For 2025, we're budgeting $900,000 for that purpose. The next one on here is the Schilling Air Force Environmental Fund. As you recall, the city got $67 million back in 2021. We basically carry a huge budget in case they are going to do projects or parts of those projects to cover that project. So we're budgeting $50 million in that, which basically would spend a majority of their fund balance. I don't anticipate that they'll spend probably more than $20 million. They are getting to the point where they're going to be bringing contracts for actual work construction projects. And so we'll be seeing some of that funding be spent down, I believe, in 2025.
Yeah, one of the elements of that treatment is a facility to pump and treat or remove water, groundwater, treat it, and then re-inject it in the ground, and that's forthcoming. So that won't spend the entire fund balance, but it will be a sizable expense.
Yeah, and we expected that they're going to spend a lot of their dollars in the first 5 years, and then after that, it's just really a testing and maintenance of that fund for then the next 30 years or something like that. So we'll be expecting that fund balance to start dropping over the next 5 years significantly. The next fund is Workers' Compensation Fund. This one we really just target and we budget based on the historical claims at $300,000, and then the revenue we put in is transferred from the operations of the other departments in the city because this is self-funded. We do have a target range policy, and that target fund range for this year is $862,000 to $1.5 million, and we believe with this recommendation of $300,000 and $250,000 revenue, we stay within that target range fairly closely, and we still minimize the expense against those operating funds. The next fund would be the health fund. I mentioned we were still working on those numbers, so that's not in this this presentation. It will be next week. The next fund is Central Garage, which is an internal service fund. We're budgeting $2.1 million, which is about a 5.68% increase over 2024. With a fund which brings them in at about $87,000 net income, and maintains their fund balance, which has a target of $100,000.
And we say it's an internal service fund, but we do provide services to the county, the sheriff's department, health department, outside building authority, outside agencies. And so in addition to budgeting, we've had conversations about in the outside of the budget cycle, going back and taking a look at our fee structure and cost plus approach. We want to do that and time it appropriately so that it's not a rate increase shock to any of the outside agencies, but that's something we'll be taking a look at as we get through the budget cycle.
Yeah, because that whole situation takes what we buy and what we spend and adds it, but it doesn't cover capital costs. So we need to make sure that we're maintaining enough in here for capital improvements. So that's one of the things we're looking at is how do we make sure that we're charging enough in those rates and in those fees to cover those unexpected capital expenditures that come up. So the last fund, and I'll try to get through this pretty quickly because maybe I just asked for questions, but basically what we're assuming here is that we maintain the current level of funding from property tax, which is about $3.8 million, based on a revenue neutral discussion and leaving that at a revenue neutral rate. But what we do is we categorize every debt service issuance that we have for every project, and we try to separate that by what type of support or source of funding that we have committed to, and then we have to take that number and make sure we have that revenue to cover that. When it comes to property tax, there are some other pockets of revenue like motor vehicle tax, delinquent property tax, some transient guest tax that are covering the cost of that. So when we look at that number, it might not appear that we need $3.8 million every year to cover that. So what we've done is we've tried to project out into what are some of the future projects that we expect to have to fund to make sure that at that $3.8 million level of funding from property tax, that we can sustain that and also be able to fund the projects that we know that are coming in the near future. So on the first slide on 47, I've added those known projects that we've already identified: Schneider, Fire Station, East Magnolia, West Magnolia, and kind of made sure that that $3.8 million of property tax is going to be sufficient. That kind of calculates what the cost is. And then on slide 48, it shows that top line there shows what would be the current property tax that we would need for all of those projects in order to fund these as we hope to. And you can see that number goes over $3.8 million in some years, but it's under in some other years. So some of this, the fund balance and the other revenue sources that we have paying for some of those property tax assessed projects will cover those costs. But what we're trying to do is kind of level out what that property tax requirement will be, so that we can kind of figure out where we have the capacity to fund future projects. So when we get to slide 49, we've now taken all those ones that we know are happening, and we're trying to identify what's our capacity going forward. So if you look at that next schedule, you can see that out in 2027, we have a capacity of about 3 million. And so each year it kind of gives you how much that capacity would be based on that $3.8 million of property tax. Just so that we can, we're trying to get into this pre-planning, not reacting, but being proactive, so that we can rearrange those projects in that capacity as we recognize them. And so we believe that $3.8 million will sustain us with this level of funding in the future. As other projects fall off and get paid off, we'll see that number go up significantly.
So historically, we'd have a project come up, we'd figure out what the cost might be, figure out what the debt service might be, back into what the mill rate would have to be, and then struggle to figure out how we free up mill rate capacity to fund that project. As Debbie described, we're trying to anticipate that much more proactively, and in an ideal world, and not just my personal ideal world, but in a financial planning ideal world, we'd get to a steady state where that mill rate stays the same, debt's paying off on a regular basis, we're creating some capacity. It's not as regular as we might like, but you can see in those out years, there's $3 million is the top end, and then $1 million or $2 million worth of capacity. Well, as you well know, as we have projects come up, that probably isn't on an ongoing basis as much as we might need, but it's an indication of if we maintain our mill rate, if we maintain our debt service, we have a little bit of capacity that gets freed up each year. Because it is irregular at the moment, there is an $8.8 million bump in capacity in 2040, but we're identifying a project that goes with that as well. So I think at the moment, we've identified our immediate needs. We've provided for them. We're maintaining the debt service fund balance in a way that we can cover some of those slight fluctuations, and we can remain revenue neutral. Long term, ideally, we'd have a mill rate and a balance that just kind of gives you capacity to take on those new projects as they come up.
And then, so slide 50 is really the recommendation for 2025. That $7.9 million, $7,960,000 is the number that we believe is the debt payments that will be made out of the debt service fund for those general obligation bonds for payments due in 2025. Sorry, I really flew through those, so if you have any questions, if you think of any questions that we can answer next week, we'd be glad to do that. And next week, we'll be talking about the other funds again.
And we are going to meet at 2 2 o'clock next week? Is that
I don't
correct?
think we had decided on a time because we were kind of leaning towards whether we were 4 o'clock or 2 o'clock or, oh,
Sorry, and we've had the ceremonial signing come up, and I think their time slot is 1:30 to 2, so we might need to do that and give ourselves a start time at 2:30, just to allow for transition from one location to the other and to get here.
right.
But I would tell you, I'm repeating myself, but we're trying to bring you a amortized, regular, recurring plan, and we've had a little bit of struggles, not a lot of major initiatives undertaken, but we're bringing you a balanced budget, and we are bringing you plans for every category of responsibility that we can identify.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we will take a short break and be back here at 4 PM for our regular meeting. Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. Welcome to the July 8th regular meeting of the Salina City Commission. I will ask city staff if the confirmation that the Kansas Open Meetings Act required notice has been properly provided.
Yes.
Thank you. May we have roll call?
Mayor Longbine,
Here?
Commissioner Davis, Commissioner Hoppick,
Here?
Commissioner Ivy,
Here?
Commissioner Lankowitz.
Here.
Thank you. May all who are willing and able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have no public hearings. That will bring us to the consent agenda.
Item 4.1, approve the minutes of the meeting of June 24th, 2024. Item 4.2, authorize the mayor to accept permanent sidewalk and temporary construction easements in front of the YMCA athletic fields. Item 4.3, authorize the city manager to enter into a feasibility study cost share agreement with the Department of the Army for the Smoky Hill River Renewal Project. Item 4.4, authorize the city manager to execute a license agreement with MCI Metro doing business as Verizon to allow for maintenance and operation of a fiber optic network in the city's public rights of way. And item 4.5, authorize the city manager to execute an implementation agreement with Priority Dispatch Corporation for a fire and police priority dispatch system.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda?
Mayor Longbine, I'd ask that we pull item 4.3.
We will remove item 4.3 from the consent agenda. Is there any other item a commissioner would like to remove? Very good. Item 4.3, or I guess we need to approve consent agenda items 4.1, 4.2, 4.4, and 4.3.
Yeah, Mayor Longbine, I move we approve consent agenda items 4.1, 4.2, 4.4, and 4.5.
I'll second that.
Have a motion and a second to approve consent agenda items 4.1, 2, 4, and 5. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Item 4.3. Ms. Tasker.
Not sure I have a particular question. It's kind of, this is an ongoing process, and I know we approved back in 2017 a feasibility study. I just think that it'd be advantageous to kind of just give us a highlight of this and where we're at and the time frame for this feasibility study, since this is a fairly large project for the community.
So, do you want my long version or the short version of the blue sheet?
Do you have a short version?
Well, the folks in the back say I never have a short
That's why I
version.
asked.
So I just want to make sure I don't take more than my 10 minutes they say I always take.
Yeah.
So I'll try to get to the point.
Thank you.
In general, you mentioned the two staff reports. One had to do with feasibility study CAP program. The second had to do with converting from the CAP program to the general investigation program, which is what we're here for today, is that agreement. And looking back, the reason we converted from the CAP program to the GI program was roughly we outgrew the cost in the CAP program. Their funding had a cap of $10 million. So by moving to the general investigation program, had a cost savings to us too of roughly $3.5 million. So basically the agreement that's attached is what they call a federal cost share agreement. And in a nutshell, really it's an exploration of the project and whether it has the merits and I'll say viability to move forward, and you go through a detailed exploration of all the aspects of the project, technical, legal, economic, financial, and so on. So it's fairly lengthy process, and the agreement that's attached has 10 articles, but in general, I think 3 of them probably are most important. and they affect the cost of the project. One is a project management plan, has a cost of $25,000, and basically it's developed with the Corps and the city, and it specifies the scope, the cost, and the schedule for the feasibility study. So that's where we're headed with that. And then Article 3 talks about the overall cost for the feasibility study, and it's estimated to be $1.6 million with $800,000 each from the city and the Corps or the government. There is a termination or suspension phase, and really that's with 30 days we can cancel. In the event not of all of our money is spent, we have the ability to get that back. The agreement that's attached was approved by the city's legal counsel and the finance department. Just after I sent it for the city commission packet, the Northwest Division Office of Counsel gave approval for the district commander to sign the agreement. So all of the approvals are in place for the agreement. As mentioned before, the RAISE agreement and this ecosystem project really run together in a general time frame. I did put a time schedule in your packet. Kind of in a nutshell, the design for the RAISE grant is to be complete by mid-2026. The official date's April. And then construction is really for 4 years, 27 through 2030. The feasibility study matches with that very closely. That's to be completed in 2026 with construction, or with design in 27 and 28, construction in 2029 and 2030. But the big goal is to have the water flowing by the end of 2030.
So what we're proving, this feasibility study, we really won't have any answers back until 2026, is what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. I tried to identify that as a lengthy process there.
Okay.
So.
Well, I think that's what the public kind of needs to hear, because we keep hearing where we're at on the river project, and it's...
And that is a recurring question. It's an understandable question. And one thing that I know you're aware of, but to just kind of remind everyone of, is we had a public hearing and a public process, and Martha probably knows the date, I don't, where we posed a deliberate question of, do we go ahead and get started on our own and not pursue outside funding, or do we want to take a slower timeline but try to pursue outside funding? And then we've had an ongoing conversation with the Corps of Engineers. It's not pre-approved, it's not guaranteed, but they are very aware of our project and seem very supportive of it. If you combine the RAISE grant funding and this program funding, that leverages about $36 million of outside funding compared to the $23 million that we initially funded. So recapping, we made a conscious decision that it was going to take a little bit longer, but we were going to pursue outside funds, and we are being successful in that.
I'm not sure we can not afford for the outside funding, but it is a lengthy process, and I think
the bottom line is they actually match up in time frame fairly well, that by the time we get the grant for the RAISE grant in place and the bridges built, it would be nice to not have water and then have the water flow after that point. So the two projects, I keep thinking someone from above really helped us by putting us into this time frame, and they do match together nicely for a complete project. And so that's really the nutshell, is to be water flowing by the end of 2030, which I know you can't count that far on one hand, so it seems like a long, long time down the road. But considering we've started this in 2010 and we're still pursuing it as hard as we are, at least internally, it's a worthwhile project that got lots of time in. So I could tell you more about the budget, but I would guess you probably know all of those dollars and have heard them too many times from me.
Yeah, and the budget can still change.
Yes, it can, and I tried to identify some of that. But
well, thank you for updating. I just think that was important.
One thing, I get one more second here, is since we are going to have a signing ceremony next Monday, Mr. Scraggs, city manager, has I noted that he'd like to change the name from the city manager to the mayor when you make your motion for the project.
Yeah,
Signing
we
of the
talked about
agreement.
next Monday, what the Corps actually wants to have a ceremonial signing of the agreement, which is something they do. The colonel is either transferring or retiring. I can't remember which.
I think they move on to
Okay, so-
another position. His 3 years' time appears to be up.
Okay, so he's anxious to get it signed, have the ceremonial signing in conjunction with Senator Moran. So that's the Monday event that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And in light of all that, rather than have the city manager sign, it's my suggestion that you authorize the mayor to sign so that the mayor is representing us in that ceremonial signing.
So upon approval and signing this agreement, this project should be cemented and moving forward. Is that correct?
That is the goal of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to keep this project moving. They're committed from the district to their head division and headquarters in this project, and think it's a great project. So
Yeah,
they're
and
committed. Funding is always a topic that we have to continue to pursue, but we will continue to ask for dollars when it's appropriate.
And it does seem like a long time off, but it's hard to believe this year's half over too, so.
That's true.
And it is detailed plans. It's a healthy set of plans that'll have to be developed.
So,
Okay,
okay,
thank you.
thank you.
Any other comments? Any public comment?
Ben Winholtz, 202 South Estates. You're listing this as two major projects, the first one being the aquatic ecosystem restoration, AKA moving water that will sustain wildlife, water wildlife. I'm trying to figure out how you're going to accomplish this with 35 neighborhood drains going into this. You can put it in as many catch stations for trash that you want and neutralizing stations for things in the street, but I don't think you're ever going to get a clean river by your standards of what you say you're going to get because you have 35 neighborhood drains, which is a lot of square footage of town draining into this. And there's a reason for it's draining into it, and that's the reason why something hasn't been done for 55 years, is because you can't keep it clean.
Any other comment? I'll bring this back for action.
Mayor Longbine, I move that we authorize the mayor to sign the feasibility cost share agreement with the Department of the Army for the Smoky Hill River, Salina, Kansas, aquatic ecosystem restoration feasibility study.
Second that.
I have a motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign the feasibility cost share agreement with the Department of the Army for the Smoky Hill River, Kansas aquatic ecosystem restoration feasibility study. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 4-0. That will bring us to developmental business, item 6.1.
Item 6.1, approve resolution number 24-8221, a resolution of support for KC Development LLC to submit a Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit application for properties in Stone Lake.
Mayor Longbine, before we get started, I'd like to recuse myself due to a conflict.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Driscoll.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, before you have a request by Stone Lake for the KHITC tax credit. As a reminder, we've been working through several different programs that the state has, really kind of since that COVID period, to entice and incentivize housing and make that more affordable. Particularly Kansas Housing Resource Corporation is managing the applications for this new tax credit known as HB 2237. It's an economic incentive designed to reduce income tax liability for housing investors proportional to the awarded amount of credits. It has roughly 13 million available in tax credits for qualified housing projects located in counties less than 75,000 residents. Depending on the size of the community, you can get up to 35 units or $35,000 per unit in tax credit, and we do qualify for that max amount. It is anticipated that these tax credits are then sold if they're received by the developer to help pay for equity in the project. There will be no awards for more than 1.2 million. And we have had others apply for these in our community. Not all of them have been awarded. This year, within this funding cycle, City Commission approved a resolution of support for Southview Estates to apply for round 1 of the 2024 KHITC tax credits on May 13th of 2024. We originally started doing these in 2022, and they were part of the moderate income housing program. By 2023, they had separated those out, and this is the second year where they've been separated out like that. A little bit of background about the development that's currently applying for these tax credits. Stone Lake Development covers 100 acres of a 150-acre tract of land that's bordered by South Ohio Street on the west and Lakeview Estates or the Knox Sand Pit to the north, the Johnson Sand Pit on the east, and Schilling Road to the south. Stone Lake is a mixed-use subdivision which contains 154 residential building lots and 7 commercial building lots. The current request is for the attached resolution of support to be approved by the Commission. This was submitted by Ross Vogel on behalf of KC Development LLC to apply for this tax credit. There are 20 rental duplexes within the Stone Lake Development Phase 1 and Phase 3C asking to be part of this tax credit for a maximum ask of $30,000 per unit. So the total ask for the 2024 KHITC application on this project is $600,000. The 20 rental duplexes will include 10 3-bedroom, 2-bath units at 1,064 square feet and 10 2-bedroom, 2-bath units at 860 square feet. The proposed lease rate of these units will range from $1,100 to $1,300 a month. The units will be marketed towards a 55-plus occupant, though that will not be required and there are no formal restrictions. The total project cost is estimated to be $2.6 million. Attachments regarding layout and product have been provided in the packet for your review. The proposed resolution is supporting this application to KHRC. It does not require any fiscal funding or matching dollars from the city. It is also not an application that's managed by the city. The applicant would make this direct submittal to the state, and all reporting goes through the applicant, not city staff. Applications for this second round, there are various rounds throughout the year. Applications for this round are due by 5 p.m. on July 12th, 2024. So with that, the request before you is for Resolution 24-8221 in support of KC Development LLC to submit to the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit application for properties in the Stone Lake subdivision. The Commission may either approve or may approve with amendments. You can also postpone and give staff further direction on what you would like us to do, or for vote to deny the resolution and provide additional direction to staff regarding how the Commission would like us to proceed. Stand for questions, and I believe Ross Vogel with the developer is online for questions as well.
And Mr. Dunn just walked in.
Oh, and Kelly's here.
That's the K out of KC, I imagine.
Probably.
Yeah. Any questions?
No questions.
Have they been successful in previous applications?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some of ours be successful. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but we have had, I think Craig and Kelly may have one of them, and I think we had another one possibly in with aeroplanes.
I know we've heard this several times. So. Okay. Does Mr. Vogel or Mr. Dunn have any comments?
Hi, Kelly Dunn, Salina, Kansas. I don't have anything to share with you. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Questions?
Questions.
Thank you.
Any public comment? I'll bring it back to the Commission for action.
Mr. Mayor, I move for approval of resolution number 24-82221, resolution of support for KC Development LLC to submit a Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit application for properties in Stone Lake Addition.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve resolution number 24-8221, a resolution of support for KC Development LLC to submit a Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit application for properties in Stone Lake. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 3-0. We'll welcome Commissioner Hoppick back. Item 6.2.
Item 6.2, authorize city staff preparation of a special assessment engineering feasibility report for internal improvements serving Liberty Edition number 3.
Mr. Hers.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Commission. My name is Dustin Hers. I'm a planner here for the City of Salina, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of a special assessment feasibility report request. So James Hall has submitted an application on behalf of South Ohio Land LLC requesting that the City Commission authorize the use of special assessments to finance an extension of public water lines and sanitary sewer lines and a portion of the cost of extending McIntosh Street from Ohio Street. So if we could go to the next aerial photo. So this is the area that we were talking about here. This is Schilling, this is Ohio, and Mr. Hall has some land down here with proposed development that is pertinent to this request. Go to the next slide, if you would, Jacob. So in 2023, the Liberty Edition number 2 plat was replatted to create Liberty Edition number 3. And what that did is it took McIntosh, which came off of Ohio, came over to Progress, and then there's this curve that kind of transitioned into Progress down to south. And what the Liberty Edition number 3 edition did was it moved the McIntosh Street further to the south, taking these 2 lots here, turning them into 3 lots. So a lot on the north, another lot on the north, and then a larger one on the south. And it also brought in McIntosh straight into the larger lot in the back. And so if we'll go to the next slide, you'll see that this is the current plat that we have, Liberty Edition number 3. It has these 2 lots on the north, the larger one in the south, and then it has McIntosh coming in to the lot in the south, lot on the west side of this property. What the developers, Mr. Hall and his team, are requesting is a feasibility study for special assessments. Go to the next slide, Jacob. In order to enable the construction of the utilities and the street, the McIntosh Street, to come in to make the Evergy plant, or new service center that they're proposing, possible. And also, if you go to the next slide, a potential industrial project that would be at the corner of Ohio and McIntosh. So this would be that first lot coming into that subdivision. Next slide, please. The breakdown of the initial cost from the engineering team for the applicant is that the McIntosh Street would be a little over $910,000. And then there's also, my eyes aren't good enough, so I got to pull in. Can you zoom in on that by chance, Jacob? Control and then forward with the wheel, maybe. So $242,000 is the construction of the box culvert, and then you have a utility line extension of over $300,000. And in total, we're looking at a little shy of $1.5 million. Now, this project has a KDOT grant, economic development grant, that the City of Salina is a party to and shared with. And what that means is the City of Salina is required to, next slide please, we are required to kick in 20% of a local match, and KDOT will fund 69% of the construction of McIntosh. And part of that construction involves the box culvert. There is a large ditch that runs north-south up to the Schilling ditch that's to the north of this property. And so that project that KDOT is helping funding is going to be for the partial construction of McIntosh as well as the construction of the box culvert, or partially part of the construction of the box culvert. And so what the applicant is looking for is a feasibility study for special assessments for the balance of the construction of McIntosh, as well as the extension of the water lines and sewer lines that are going to be part of this project. Next slide, please. So this is step one of a two-step process. Step one is you would review the proposed project, the likelihood of its feasibility, and that would authorize city staff to do a feasibility study, and then that would be brought back to you for the creation of a benefit district. So this is not necessarily a decision to create a benefit district, but further exploring and going into the details of what that would look like. So we do have a few options for you. You can go to the next slide. So you could propose, or you could approve the authorization of the feasibility study. You could postpone if you feel additional information is needed, or you could deny action of this request if you don't feel it's a feasible project. With that, we would take any questions that you might have.
Questions for Mr. Hers?
Thank you.
Does the applicant have anything to add?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you, James Hall, South Ohio Land today. We have been working on this for quite a while, have had excellent input from our team and from the city. It's been a good project so far. As I mentioned, the new Evergy project is going in the back 30 acres of this. That's the other reason that we redid the way this road was laid out, because the way I did it 17 years ago, as I've told you all in the past, was wrong. And so we've fixed that, and now we're at a point where we're ready to move forward and make that possible. It also gives us the opportunity to have smaller lots for other places who are interested in that space. We just need to get this road in so that we can allow people to start taking advantage of it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
The Evergy project, it's ready to go, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And so this is going forward for the additional property.
This will be Evergy's main entrance into their property, and it will be the main entrance for the other lots off of this as well.
So, and I would add that we entered into an agreement in 2003 for when the property was annexed that anticipated, actually committed, that the developer of South Ohio Land could utilize special assessments to make the improvements they're now proposing. And also committed the city to the box culvert that is provided for, and the KDOT grant was able to minimize not only the developer's expenses but the city's expenses. So this is all kind of in keeping with the original agreement that was entered into in 2003, but for the financial benefit of the KDOT agreement, that it's benefiting both of the local parties.
Any questions for Mr. Hall?
Thank you all.
Thank you. Any public comment? I'll bring this back for action.
Mayor, I move that we authorize staff to prepare an engineering feasibility report and resolution of advisability for Liberty Edition number 3, 4 lots for future consideration by the City Commission as requested.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second to authorize staff to prepare an engineering feasibility report and resolution of advisability for Liberty Edition number 3 for future consideration by the City Commission as requested. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 4-0. And that is 4:30, and bring us to other business. Any commissioner have an item they want to discuss or bring up?
Mr. Mayor, there was one item I just kind of wanted to touch base on, which I know the previous meeting, you had mentioned about an assessment of commission salaries or pay. And I know last year, my take on it was there's no need, and I'm reassessing that, and I've definitely reopened that conversation.
Okay, and being in the middle of the budget season, that's a good time to bring that up.
That was my thought as well.
Let me make sure my mic's on. Last year, as that conversation developed, we put a placeholder in the budget, and so we can certainly do that again, and that can then give you a little bit of time to, if you want to task staff with any research or looking at other entities, we can account for it in the budget, and then we can bring it back to you for further action at your pleasure.
Do we want to try to put that in the budget session next week?
We can certainly, I don't know how much, if you want additional information from other communities, other jurisdictions, I'm not sure how quickly we can turn that, but we certainly can account for it in the budget and have a conversation about what your expectations might be and what we should budget for.
Anything else?
Oh, yeah, I did. Sorry. We earlier today, when talking to Mr. Scragg, I asked for if we'd had very many complaints about our fireworks this last 4th of July over the 3rd and the 4th, and I know we'd received at least one email, and I'd received some comments, and one of the things since it's fresh on our mind, I think we need to discuss doing a better job of educating the public maybe next year. I think one of the things that's was maybe a little confusing is I believe Wichita's curfew was 12 o'clock for fireworks. If somebody would check that, I believe I heard that if you were listening to one of the local news stations, so there could have been some confusion. This is not my idea, but it's a really good idea. One of my employees came up with today is everyone that gets has a fireworks stand, they have to come to the city and get approved and fill out a form and everything, correct? A fee?
The ones that are inside the city limits, there are a handful that aren't.
But those
yes.
are inside the city limits. Suggested that whether we have the signs made up or whatever, maybe even make it a requirement that sign states the hours and the days that fireworks can be shot off. My comment is this is one of those issues that some people are for and some are against. What I've always said is, I wasn't on the commission when it was voted in, but it's one of those things that the public, I think, needs to self-police themselves. If they have a neighbor that's shooting fireworks after 11 o'clock, they need to go out there and say, you want to be able to do this next year, you need to abide by the rules. And so that's, but just since it's fresh on my mind, I think we just need to figure a way to make sure that the community knows, because I know there's, people that try to stretch that.
We can certainly up our communication game, and already calendared a recurring reminder in advance to kind of get that word out. And the signs, whether we provide them, and we certainly could provide them to the others as well.
Be on their cash register, they can't miss it that way.
Well,
so.
I would think that most would see that as doing their customers a service in terms of educating them, whether they're inside the city limits or not. The bulk of their customers are probably going to.
And I think the vendors need to know if they're going to continue to be able to sell in Saline County. That certain.
I was under the understanding that Wichita also had a $1,000 fine for going after hours. I'm all for fireworks as much as the next guy, but at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm not for fireworks. And maybe we do need. I don't know if there's a fine now or what the punishment is for doing. And I know it's overwhelming for the police department to have to chase down every single firework, but maybe if you put that threat of a little bit higher dollar fine on there, maybe that would curb some of it.
We can look into that as well. It is subject to our fine schedule, but and actually need to talk to legal counsel a little bit whether we can specify a minimum fine amount that's higher, like that amount.
So, well, hopefully a healthy dose of discretion. Because if it's some kid throwing the Black Cat firecracker versus somebody with a mortar, to me, I think a little officer discretion would be merited.
I had one, not this year, but last year well, that might have been New Year's Eve, but it was a flashing mortar that just jumped me out of bed and in a panic.
If we're shaking windows, I think we've definitely crossed a threshold, and to say the least.
Anyway, that was, since it was fresh on my mind, thought we ought to address that.
And Deputy City Manager Jacob Wood sent out an email earlier on the number of calls and issues we had, and I guess it concluded that nothing outside of what is normal for the 4th of July. But I guess a concern I had was people picking up after themselves. I cannot imagine the volume of waste going to the landfill from the fireworks, and those that don't do a very good job picking up with themselves. I think that could be a reminder too, that it does create a lot of litter and waste.
I actually did have another item I was going to inquire about. There was an event at Pacific Park over the weekend, Daddy Bud Day, and I think there's some talk about trying to rename Pacific Park, and was just kind of curious as to how we go about doing that, or how that is it, or I don't want to say fast track necessarily, but just it just seemed like something I'd like to bring to the discussion.
So Jeff Hammond, Parks Director, has been through naming initiatives so much he's become the expert on it. And I would note a lot of our naming our naming policy makes a distinction between a financial sponsorship and a commemorative naming. That might not be the correct term by way of the policy, but I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
I have had conversations with the representatives of the group that wish to pursue renaming of Pacific Park. And I have not seen an application yet, and that's what starts with that application, and they anticipated that application would come sometime this summer. I think their timeline, they would want to have it done 4 months ago to coincide with that event this past weekend. But part of the party that I know that's part of that is the North Salina Community Group, in conjunction with them. I believe it would be an honorary naming to honor the gentleman who was very involved in that neighborhood, and somewhat honorary for that event that occurred on Saturday. That's what I know, but I'm waiting for that application to be filed for the city clerk to recognize that as a valid application. It comes with a petition requirement, so they have to gather names. So there's a process, and then from there it would be through the Parks and Rec Advisory Board and eventually to you all.
Thank you.
It was a very big, successful event, and I'd also like to commend Parks and Rec staff for another successful play day in the park on July 4th. That was well attended as well.
Yeah, I saw a lot of pictures of bubbles. That seemed to be a big hit.
Yeah, that was a hit. Anything else? That will bring us to citizens forum. If you have a comment on something not on the agenda, please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. John Blanchard, Salina. 2 or 3 different things here. First of all, I had the opportunity to go out and look around some of our housing developments. And just curious, I was under the assumption that Aero Plains Phase 1 was 150 duplexes. It looks like they've only got about 35 or 40 of them going out there, and none of them are quite ready yet. Is there any discussion from the developer about changing the scope of that project? Second thing is, does the city of Salina, this is just a question, does the city of Salina have an ordinance for pets and dogs in particular running at large? Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
We do, okay. And I assume that if you're cited with that, you get a notice to appear or a citation?
Yes.
That would be correct? Okay. The third thing is, I agree, the Cash Hollis puts on a great event, and that's a fun event, and I'm glad they do that up in North Salina. And I would support the renaming of that park. In park-related news, in your study session, you mentioned using Glenifer Hill perhaps to sell that to use as real estate development for housing. I think that is a much better idea than using Centennial Park, and I think it'll get a lot of support. We'd also talked about putting the play equipment in Indian Rock Park back in 2017, and that was put on hold. So you might just revisit that because I think there's something already there. So kudos to whoever's great idea that was for converting Glenifer Hills Park. And then the last thing, just on a personal note, I don't know how many of you knew Earl Best Jr., but Earl Best passed away last week. He was a lifelong member of NAACP. He was Google him and go look at his obit. He was on just about every city board we had. He was just a great guy, and if I could do a proclamation for Earl, he was that kind of guy. So I know if Trent were here, he would say a thing or two about Earl because they were close, and but we need more people like Earl Best in this community. He was just a great human being, and his service is Wednesday at 10:30 at Roselawn. So anyway, we loved him, and he was just a great citizen. Thank you, guys.
Norman Mount Salina. Renaming certain areas is opening a can of worms, not only here, but nationwide. This issue is coming up nationwide, but who do you rename it for? Do you go back to its original name, which they are doing nationwide? So you start renaming stuff, you're opening a can of worms. It's not just in Kansas, this is nationwide. It may go back to its original name, which it is doing in other areas.
Anyone else? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.